Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
So we have Bill Herman with us today, and Bill Herman is associated with Art of Living since 1991. He went all the way to Bangalore to do his course. He heard about Art of Living, so he went there. He had so along with course, he also attended Astavakra Gita. Bill was a photography and art teacher in high school till he became full time with Art of Living. So Bill is based in Lake Tahoe in California and also in Chicago. So like because he's from Chicago. So he's in Art of Living from almost 29 years now. So there are so many amazing stories that are waiting for us. So Bill, how this whole journey started for you?
Well, we were going on our honeymoon, my wife Emily and I, and we'd heard about Art of Living, but we never were able to get anyone to teach us in Chicago. And we got married, and then we ended up going on our honeymoon, and we had the phone number of the Bangalore ashram. And at that time, it was very, very small, very, very small. So there was probably a payphone somewhere. And whenever we would call, we traveled all over India. So we were up in Ladakh, and we went to Agra, and we went to Kerala, and then we went to Madras, and I think a few other places as well. And we would call the ashram and say we would like to come and visit and experience it. And they said ashram full. So finally, after about a month and a half of this, we called and they said ashram empty. So we decided to go, and we found out that exactly where it was, 25 kilometer Kanapurna Road. And we showed up in the evening one night, and we got there, and it was just as satsang was starting, and I had been a TM, Transcendental Meditation meditator since 1970. So I had about 21 years of meditation experience, and I had also become a teacher of TM, but I never heard bhajans. There was no such thing as bhajans in TM. And so they had us eat some food and then go up to the satsang. There were about 25 or 30 people. And it was really the first night that Guruji was doing the Ashtavakra Gita. He had just done the prerequisites the night before. And so he was giving a talk. And when he first walked into the hall, it was sort of an interesting experience because I looked at him and he had Maharishi's face, and he had black hair though. And when I'd met Maharishi before, I had Maharishi had always had gray hair. So I was surprised. Here's a guy that's exactly the same face as Maharishi, but he's got black hair. So I was a little confused. And turned out that the next time I saw him, which was the next day, I didn't see Maharishi's face. I saw Sri Sri Ravishankar's face. At that time, we called him Panditji. And so this was in August of 1991, and then he went and told at the end of the evening, he told Joan Goodrum, who was a teacher there at the time, and he told her to come and teach us the Kriya the next morning. And I really had no idea what the Kriya was or anything about it. So she didn't teach us a full course. She basically just taught us the pranayams and the Kriya. And when she told me to do the breathing, she said, do it 100%. And since I'm 100% kind of a guy, I literally I just really gave it 100%. And I literally could feel every cell of my body with pleasure and pain. And it was really intense. And after a short time, I was screaming, and at one point I ripped off my shirt and threw it across the room. And my wife didn't seem to be having the same reaction as I was. I was like going just full tilt. And so it was a little scary. But I did the breathing again. And then the next day somebody sort of said to me, you don't have to breathe so hard or something like that. So I had a little bit different experience, but it was very intense. And actually, at one moment, I opened my eyes slightly because there was a little flurry of activity at the door. The door was wide open, and there was a group of about five or six Indian women with baskets of clothing on their head, dressed in saris, that they were back on their way, coming back from doing their laundry or something. And they were sort of like looking in with big eyes, like, what are they doing to this guy? Because they could hear my screaming probably for miles around. So that was my first experience of Kriya. And then after a little while, it sort of settled down, and I was doing it. I began doing it every day, and I found that my meditation experience got much, much deeper. We stayed at the ashram for about a week, and we got to hear Ashtavakra every night, and it was really a beautiful experience. And as we were leaving, I was doing a lot of artwork. You can see one of my paintings on the wall behind here. And I did a painting of the area surrounding the ashram, like a landscape. And I went to town and had it framed and gave it to Guruji. And then he gave me this beautiful little statue. I was looking around if it's right here, but it's upstairs, of Radha and Krishna to bless our wedding. And it was a really beautiful moment. And we said goodbye. And we didn't see him again for about a year. We went back and we had our first year of wedded bliss. And we were living in Chicago at that time. And I had a habit of going on canoe trips where I would pack up a canoe and head up into the Canadian wilderness, where there's really nothing up there except trees and lakes and rivers and nature, pure nature. And I would spend a lot of time. So we made a plan to go up there and have a nice long 2-month canoe trip. But after a few days, the river turned over our canoe, and we ended up getting redirected, you could say. And I really didn't know what to do afterwards, but I had this feeling that came in me that, like Guruji is out on the West Coast somewhere of the United States, and we have the rest of the summer. So why don't we just get in our car and drive out there? We drove about 3,000 miles or so to go. We got on the phone and found out that he was actually teaching the basic course. And since we hadn't had the basic course, it seemed like an appropriate thing to do. And one of the things that happened at the end of this course, it was very sweet, but I received the question at the very end, what are the divine qualities, or how do you bring up the divine qualities in other people? And at the end of the course, the other teachers that were there, they were sort of wrapping up the course, and nobody said anything about the homework question. So and Guruji was sitting there. So I just raised my hand and I said, I'm a little disappointed in you guys because you never asked us about the homework question. And I had thought about it. And so I actually, and Guruji sort of perked up and he said, yeah, please tell us. He got very enthusiastic. And the other teachers were a little bit embarrassed. And basically I told him the story of how, as a photography teacher, I had given my students an assignment. And to me, this was exactly answering the question, what did you do to bring up the divine qualities? The assignment was that they had to photograph God. And this was a kind of an unusual assignment to be giving in public school. Usually people never talked about God in public school. It was sort of forbidden. But I thought it was a really interesting assignment. So I would give them this assignment and we would sit and have a discussion about it. And it was very, very profound and be interesting to hear different people and then to see what their response was, how they would portray God in photographic terms. And so it was quite a nice assignment. And I got so enthusiastic and I told him this whole story. And afterwards, he listened with so much attention And afterwards, I had this feeling sort of like, like this guy is going to do something with young people. And he's going to maybe do something with education because he obviously loves teaching. He has so much enthusiasm for education. And it was sort of like he made some mental note in his Rolodex. I had this feeling like he was like, okay, he heard me who I was. And this was back in 1992. So I started realizing, because I had many experiences where something unusual happened. Excuse me, that's just a little paint on I was out painting in the woods a little while ago. I go out into the forest and paint pictures like this. And so I started getting this feeling like, things are different when I'm around him. And because the experiences started becoming very powerful, like, and I sort of formed this idea that he is a master teacher, which is something that I really respected, because at that point, I had been teaching high school professionally for about 16 years. As an art teacher, my role was to inspire people and to bring out their creativity. So I really felt that he was some kind of a master teacher, because he could sort of set me up to learn lessons. And the lessons were coming through my own mind and coming through consciousness. And instead of him like getting up and telling you something, if he could give you an experience, and then you could reflect on that experience and understand a little bit more of a deeper lesson about your own, whatever it is in your life. And I've received many, many, many lessons like this. So to me, this is what a guru story is. A guru story is, how does he work with us through our own consciousness, through our own mind, and set us up to learn these amazing lessons. It's sort of, I couldn't pretend to say that I understand how it works, but that he somehow can plant either feeling, a sort of a feeling like of anxiety, for example. One of the stories that I told recently on another one of these discussions was a story of how he gave me this feeling of anxiety. I don't know that he gave it, but I came up with a feeling of anxiety on my way to the ashram. So I was on my way to Guru Purnima, and I was at my sister-in-law's wedding, and I had this very long voyage ahead of me. It was about a 30-hour voyage, 36-hour voyage, to get from a small town in Indiana, which is in the Midwest of the United States, taking various shuttles and plane to from Indianapolis to Chicago to Montreal, getting picked up at the airport and taken to a hotel or a university campus where I was supposed to spend the night. This whole very long, complicated journey that had probably 15 different transfers in it. And all of a sudden, I felt this anxiety, like I wasn't going to get there. And that's not like me, because I'm usually very trusting. And when I finally got there and set up my tent out in the woods, and with all these mosquitoes biting me, and it was just this 30-hour voyage of anxiety, mental anxiety, which is completely unlike me. I go and I sit down in the hall, and he comes in, and it turns out that I was sitting a little bit off from the center. And as he sat down, I realized there was a plant that was blocking the view. I couldn't see his face. And he sat down, and immediately he sort of leaned forward. He pushed the plant to the side, and he looked me straight in the eyes and he said these two words, just trust. And that was such a powerful moment for me, because I realized that somehow he had spent the last 36 hours or whatever it was, um, giving me this, like this fog, this cloud of anxiety that was in me. I wasn't trusting at all that the process would work out. And all of a sudden he looks me straight in the face and he says those two words. And I would never forget those two words. How could I forget that? That experience was so profound. So this is, I would say, how he's taught me. He's been with me. There was a moment in the car when the first time I went to Navaratri, on the first day I arrived, which is in 1997. Back then there were 200 people in the ashram at Navaratri, and I arrived and I got my baggage settled, and then somebody came and said, well, we're going to the city. We're going for a satsang. So somehow I ended up being in the car with Guruji, and it was just me and him and a driver. And he asked me this question, and it was a very interesting question. He said, how many people are on the planet? And I think I had just become an Art of Living teacher, maybe a year before. And I said, well, Guruji, I think there's about 6 billion, something like that. And then he said, how many people could one Art of Living teacher teach? And I said, well, like in their lifetime, maybe 100,000, 200,000, something like that. And then he said, so how many Art of Living teachers do I need? And I did some kind of mathematical thing, maybe 60,000 or something like that. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. And I just sat there and I pondered for the rest of the drive. So it was like this moment that I had with him, that he actually had a short conversation with me and said some things. And yeah, it's a mystery how the whole process works, but he somehow knows, and he knows what each of us need at the moment. So there's a couple of stories about my daughter that I'd really love to tell, and one of them, yeah, it's okay. So one of them is a few years later. This was 97, but a few years later, probably it was about 2001 or 2002. And I had brought my daughter, my wife had come to Navaratri because I had gone 2 or 3 times, and she was ready to have the experience for herself. So she went, and I ended up bringing my daughter. She was 8 years old, which is when she decided that she was going to be ready to go to India. Because we had asked her from the time she was very young when she wanted to go to India. She always said 8 years old. So, and this was one thing Guruji had always told us, that we should listen to her, that she knows she's the teacher, and that we should really listen to her. So we ended up going there, and she's an amazing kid. It's hard to explain her, put her into words, but she's always had so much wisdom, deep wisdom within her. And we were at the end of I think after Guruji had come out of silence, and my daughter Tika had written a poem, and she had somehow gotten it to Guruji. And one night there was the satsang, and there were about 2,000 people there at that time. And we were sitting there, and she was asked by him to come up on the stage and read the poem. And at first she was like, she sort of melted into this, like she was like, no way am I going up there. Like she got really shy all of a sudden. And we said, well, Guruji asked you to read the poem. And after a minute or so, she sort of said, okay. And she ended up going up on the stage, and she was there, and she was, Guruji she had a way of melting in his presence. I mean, it was quite beautiful, but she just melted at this moment. And he handed her the poem that she had given, and I was going to read it just to give you an understanding of what it was. It goes like this. The ocean. The ocean is vast, dark, deep, and mysteriously melancholy. It stretches out for miles and miles, sometimes angry, jealous, and mad, sometimes silly, happy, and glad. Day after day, I wait here, listening to the wind, rushing across my raging waves, the sun beating down on my burning surface. I am the ocean, giving life, death, and happiness to everything in existence. I am the ocean. So she read this thing, and it really did. The people sitting around us were sort of sighing to some extent, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful moment. And one of the things that I realized actually much earlier was that he would honor her in such a beautiful way that was almost his way. I felt partly was a way for him to honor me and to honor my wife, and that we would be given this like experience of seeing her completely uplifted and in some kind of state of love. And then that would be something that was almost as much of, I mean, certainly a gift to her, but for me as a father or as a parent to be able to see my daughter honored in that way by Guruji was a real treasure of an experience. I mean, it was like, okay, he can't tell Bill that he's a great guy or that he's doing amazing things or anything like that, because there's a huge danger that that'll get to my ego and it'll make me like, you know, it'll expand my ego. But he can do it through her. And this was one of the ways that I've seen him work with me. There was one time when I first did the